A story about why we must think before we judge. In the small town of Elmsbridge, hidden between two lush hills and hugged by winding cobblestone streets, lived a man named Elias Morel. Elias was not a man many people knew well, though everyone seemed to know about him. His name was whispered behind garden fences, spoken with sideways glances in the bakery, and nodded at when his shadow passed down the street. He was the man with the dusty shop, the one who never smiles, or simply, that old fellow in the gray coat. Elias owned a curious little shop tucked into the corner of Market Street. The sign above the door read, Elias's Curiosities in faded, hand-painted letters. The windows were foggy with age, and the shelves inside were crowded with old clocks, rusted keys, teacups with chips, mirrors with gold trim, and music boxes that hadn't sung in years. No one quite knew why Elias kept the shop running. He didn't seem to get many customers. The children in town called it the ghost shop and dared each other to peek inside. Adults told their children not to go near. That man's got a past, they'd say. Don't talk to him. He's odd. You never know with people like that. But no one could say for certain what made Elias odd. They only knew he kept to himself and didn't smile much. In truth, Elias had once been a man full of smiles and dreams. Long ago, he'd fallen in love with a woman named Marianne. She was full of light. She laughed often and loved old things just as much as Elias. Together, they opened the antique shop and filled it with objects from their travels, a silver locket from Prague, a chessboard from Morocco, teacups from English estates, a cracked compass from a shipwreck off the Irish coast. For them, every object held a memory, a mystery, and a moment of joy. But joy, like glass, is fragile. Marianne became ill, quietly, then suddenly. The sickness stole her strength day by day, and before Elias could prepare his heart, she was gone. He closed the shop for a time. When he reopened it, he changed nothing. Her scarf still hung on the back of the counter chair. Her favorite cracked teacup, the one she called Grace for its lopsided beauty, still sat on the windowsill. The shop became a sanctuary for Elias, not for business, but for memory. He dusted the shelves, kept the lights dim, and waited, he didn't know for what. Years passed. Then one spring afternoon, something changed. A girl named Lila, 12 years old and new to Elmsbridge, walked past the shop on her way home from school. She paused by the window, wiping a circle into the dusty glass and peering in. The faded gold inside caught the sun just enough to glimmer. Something about the place pulled at her, like a whisper only she could hear. Lila was the kind of girl who asked questions. While other kids her age thought the shop creepy, she thought it curious. One day, unable to resist, she pushed the door open. The bell above the door gave a rusty chime. Elias looked up from behind the counter. He said nothing for a moment. His eyes, pale blue and tired, settled on her. "Can I help you?" he asked finally. Lila hesitated. "I just wanted to look." He nodded and returned to polishing an old teacup. From that day on, Lila visited the shop after school. At first, she only walked around quietly. She'd run her fingers along the spines of old books, stare at a painting with peeling edges, and hum softly to the broken music boxes. After a few visits, she began asking questions. "What's this from? Who used to own this mirror? Why do you keep a broken compass?" Elias answered in short, thoughtful phrases. But over time, he began to open up. He told her stories about the boy who carved the wooden soldier in the 1800s, about the lantern carried through storms at sea, about how the cracked teacup once belonged to a duchess who threw it at her husband during a great scandal. That's my favorite, Lila said, pointing to the cracked cup. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful. Elias looked at her a long moment, then said, almost in a whisper, that was my wife's favorite too. Their friendship grew silently. It wasn't loud or quick. It was built in the soft creak of floorboards, in the comfort of stillness, and in the gentle warmth of stories. But the town noticed. The whispers started. That girl's always in that shop. What's he doing with her in there all the time? He's too old to have a child's attention like that. It's not right. Lila's mother was approached by two neighbors. It might be best, they said with falsely kind smiles, if your daughter spent her time elsewhere. But she's happy, her mother replied. She talks about the stories, about antiques and history. Still, one of them interrupted, you know what people will think. The next day, Lila was told not to go to the shop. She didn't listen. But that afternoon, Elias knew something was wrong. Her eyes were clouded with worry, and she sat more quietly than usual. Are people saying things? He asked. Lila looked down at her shoes and nodded. Elias sighed and stared at the teacup between them. People judge what they don't understand. Why don't they just ask, she said. Because it's easier to believe a story they've made up than to hear the truth. She nodded, but tears welled in her eyes. They think you're bad. He didn't flinch. They always have. That was the last time she visited. Her mother had put her foot down. A week passed. Then another. And then Elias's shop was destroyed. Someone had broken in during the night. The front window was shattered. Shelves had been knocked over. A note had been spray-painted in red across the wall. Stay away from our kids. The police arrived. People stood around the scene and shook their heads. Terrible, said one woman. Well, you know how it looked, whispered another. No smoke without fire, said a man with folded arms. No one helped clean up. No one offered kindness. Except Lila. She came that afternoon alone, carrying a box of trinkets from her own home. I brought these, she said, her voice shaking. Maybe we can start over. Elias took the box gently. I'm so sorry, she said. They don't know. They didn't ask. He closed his eyes and sat down. My wife, she used to say that people only see the cracks in others because they're afraid to look at their own. After she died, people didn't ask what happened. They just assumed I stopped smiling because I was cold. But really, I just didn't know how to smile without her. Lila said nothing, but she reached across the counter and placed the cracked teacup back on its shelf. Somehow, it had survived the vandalism. That summer, something remarkable happened. The mayor's son wandered into the shop, looking for an old coin for his collection. Then the baker's daughter came, curious about a dusty phonograph. Slowly, more children followed. And then the adults. Elias, once silent, now told stories again, not just to Lila, but to anyone who would listen. He spoke about love, loss, adventure, mistakes, and forgiveness. He never asked for pity. He simply told the truth. The town of Elmsbridge began to change. One by one, those who had judged him without reason came to understand their error. They saw that the quiet man was not strange, only sad. That he was not dangerous, only lonely. That he had been kind all along, but in a way most people failed to recognize. And one day, a sign was hung above the newly restored shop. Elias and Friends. Where every object has a story. Right next to the counter sat the cracked teacup, now filled with wrapped candies. And below it, a plaque that read, Beauty remains, even in broken things. Moral of the story. Don't judge someone by their silence, their sorrow, or their past. Ask. Listen. Understand. Because once you know someone's story, your judgment may turn into respect and even admiration.